Most of y'all may know me as Nate Boone Craft, the Grim Reaper.
You were gonna kill your brother?
Well, yeah, but see, he wasn't a brother no more after he did what he did.
Do you feel bad or have any remorse for any of these 30?
If you think you've heard of some of the deadliest gangsters, then you probably haven't heard of Nate Boone Craft, one of Detroit's most feared hitmen. Boone wasn't your average criminal. He claims to have offed at least 30 people during his notorious career.
Craft has admitted to killing over 30 people, some friends, some enemies, most strangers.
Whether it was a gun or a knife, he was always deadly accurate. His knife didn't just end lives, it sliced off body parts as proof to show his clients that the job was done. Boone wasn't picky either. From inmates to cops to rivals, nobody was safe. If you had the cash in the 1980s and needed someone dead, Boone was your man. But what makes his story even more chilling is the fact that he once almost offed his own brother. After a heated argument over money, Boone actually pulled out a gun and aimed it at his brother's head.
When I get my shotgun, I'm coming back in. I'm gonna do him real quick.
Who, your brother?
He was ready to pull the trigger without a second thought, but their mother stepped in just in time, shoving the gun away so the bullet hit the ceiling instead of his brother. It shows just how cold-blooded he had become. If his own brother wasn't safe from Boone's wrath, nobody was. To understand how Boone became such a ruthless killer, you have to look at his upbringing. He grew up on Detroit's east side, and from a young age, he was already built different. His parents worked hard, often struggling to make ends meet, while his father spent time away in the army. Seeing his family work long hours without ever reaching financial stability left a deep impression on Boone. Even as a kid, he was always trying to make money, whether through legal hustles or something else. But Boone had an obsession with getting rich, and it didn't take long for him to turn to the streets. By the time he was just 9 years old, he was already getting involved in the drug game, working for a man named Charlie. Boone wasn't your average 9-year-old. He was sharp, with a mind that operated like an 18-year-old. While running his legal hustles, Boone noticed that the real money was all flowing toward one man's house, and that was Charlie's. Boone wanted in, and he wasn't afraid to do whatever it took.
So I started hustling from the age of 9.
9 years
I
old.
was out there selling heroin with this guy named Charlie.
By the time he was 10, Boone had already committed his first MDR. He wasn't haunted by it or racked with guilt. In fact, he said he slept better knowing that the person standing in the way of him making money was out of the picture.
The first, you were 9 going on 10 years old. What was that like?
I slept good. Matter of fact, I slept better because now I know I'm going to make my money.
That cold detachment was a sign of what was to come. Boone quickly realized he had a talent for the drug business, but even more so as an enforcer. His job was to go after anyone who owed Charlie money, and Boone handled it with ruthless efficiency. But things started to take a turn when Boone felt disrespected by Charlie. Despite all the dirty work Boone was doing, Charlie refused to increase his pay. And when Boone issued a warning, Charlie brushed it off and talked down to him. That was all it took. In just a few seconds, Boone pulled out his gun and sent Charlie to the afterlife, showing that no one, no matter their rank, was going to disrespect him.
We told him, hey man, did this, man. You gotta give us some more money. I ain't giving y'all nothing. Y'all should be happy that I'm letting you work. He talking about what gonna happen when you get to whatever number. You find out. We blasted. Yeah.
Boone's violent streak wasn't just born out of his desire to make money. His aggressive nature was molded from his childhood experiences of being picked on. He had been bullied by other kids, and his sister would even beat him up for letting it happen. She was tired of seeing him get pushed around, and Boone reached a breaking point. It was either fight back or keep being humiliated. Boone chose to fight, and from then on, he became a walking MDR machine. Boone really started making a name for himself alongside one of his friends. If the price was right, it didn't matter who you wanted gone. They'd be dead in a heartbeat. But as always in the streets, things took a bad turn. Boone and his homie were planning to rob a store, but a security guard tried to stop them. They didn't hesitate and shot him, turning what was supposed to be a simple robbery into something much darker. That incident put Boone on a fast track to the system. It seemed like his days of causing chaos might be over, at least for a while. He got sent to a youth home before being moved to the Wayne County Child Development Center, where he ended up in a foster home. But Boone couldn't hide his violent ways for long. It didn't take much to set him off, and when another kid messed with him, Boone took a baseball bat to the kid, beating him senseless.
He turns around, still talking mess about me. I looked over at the closet. I see the bats in there. I look back at his head, back at the closet, push back. On the kid, what the hell? By the time he turned around and looked, I caught him dead in the picture like that. Wham!
That was the last straw. Tired of his ruthless attitude and non-stop aggression, the center sent him to the Hawthorne Center, where they gave him a full psychiatric evaluation. They thought maybe something was mentally wrong with him, but the truth they found out was even more disturbing. Boone didn't have a mental illness, he just didn't care about life, other people, or the consequences of his actions. The staff at Hawthorne quickly realized there was nothing they could do for Boone. Even they, who dealt with troubled kids all the time, didn't want any part of his chaos. So they tried to send him back to the Child Development Center, but they didn't want him either. Boone's hunger for violence was so strong that nobody knew what to do with him, and the system practically threw him out. He was just 16 and completely on his own. His family had moved away, leaving him to fend for himself, and Boone was now sleeping at bus stops with no real place to go. But even in those tough times, life had a strange way of opening new doors for Boone, though they led to more violence and death. One night, while he was crashing at a bus stop, a woman took pity on him and offered him a place to stay. At first, it seemed like maybe Boone had caught a break, but that woman turned out to be a prostitute. She was regularly beaten by her pimp, and when Boone saw what was happening, it sparked something in him. Boone wasn't into the idea of being a pimp himself. He didn't like the thought of taking money that women had earned, but violence? That was something he understood. So instead of being her pimp, Boone stepped in as her protector.
She finally just said, well, I said, don't worry about it, I'll protect you.
Word quickly spread among the other women in the streets about Boone's reputation as a protector. It wasn't long before more and more women started ditching their pimps to come under Boone's wing. His new hustle was straightforward. He'd take a 10% cut for offering protection. For a while, this setup worked well, but Boone eventually left that life behind, hoping to settle down and start a family with his girlfriend. However, Boone was one of those people who couldn't stay away from the lifestyle for long. Crime wasn't just something he did, it was who he was. As the years went on, Boone's reputation grew alongside his body count. People started calling him the Grim Reaper and Iceman, names that stuck because of his cold, ruthless nature. He earned the nickname Iceman while doing time in jail, where he showed just how far he was willing to go. Even offing a prison guard didn't faze him. If you disrespected Boone or hurt anyone he cared about, it was almost a guaranteed death sentence. One guy named Leroy learned that lesson the hard way when he made the mistake of putting his hands on Boone's sister. Boone didn't just off Leroy, he took it to another level by slashing his neck wide open, and then, in one of his darkest moments, Boone actually basked in the warmth of his victim's blood. That's the kind of violence Boone was capable of, and it showed just how twisted he had become.
What did Leroy do to you to make him kill him?
He thought he could just mess with my family, and you don't mess with my family.
Wait, how did you kill him?
With my knife.
And he didn't expect it at all?
Oh no, most people do not expect me to move that quickly or that gentle, and blood just squirting out there. I like, and my boy, man, why don't you move out the way, man? I said, I know I'm messing up the shape. He said, but the blood's still going. I said, yeah, I want to make sure he empty. So what you want to do with the body?
What made Boone even more terrifying was that not even family was safe. His loyalty only went so far, and if someone crossed him, even a relative, they were on borrowed time. Boone actually tried to off one of his own brothers after finding out that he had stolen from him.
When I get my shotgun, I'm coming back in. I'm gonna do him real quick.
Who, your brother?
The only thing that stopped him was his mother, who physically had to get in between Boone and his brother, pushing the shotgun out of the way before he could pull the trigger. It was a close call, and it showed that Boone's rage could turn on anyone. As Boone's street career continued, he found himself in the company of some of the most feared and dangerous men in Detroit. Together, they formed a crew called the Best Friends, a name that sounded innocent but was filled with irony, as many of them would eventually turn into bitter enemies. The gang was stacked with serious hitters, including Demetrius Holloway, Stacy Colbert, the Brown brothers, Ezra, Gregory and Reginald, and Terrence Boogaloo Brown. Boone's status only rose as part of this crew, and with his reputation as a top hitman, he started rubbing shoulders with some of the major players in the crime world. One of those big names was drug kingpin Richard Carter, better known as Maserati Rick. Rick was one of the most powerful dealers in Detroit at the time, and he brought Boone on as his personal bodyguard. Rick had direct connections to the Colombians, which kept him well stocked and on top of the drug game. But things started to unravel when Boone and the Best Friends crew got involved. In the drug world, world, there's always someone plotting to take the top spot, and for Rick, that person was Terrence Boogaloo Brown, also known as Boo. Rick made a critical mistake when he introduced Boo to his Colombian connect, not realizing that Boo had his own agenda. Boo was not interested in playing second fiddle to Rick. He wanted to cut him out of the deal completely. It wasn't long before Rick became the target of a hit. He was shot, but he managed to survive the initial attempt on his life. Unfortunately, his time was running out. Boone believes that Boo was the one behind Rick's eventual emder, which happened while Rick was still recovering in the hospital. To Boone, it was clear that Boo had made his move to eliminate Rick and take control of the drug empire for himself. With Maserati Rick out of the way, Boone and the Best Friends crew were making more money than ever, solidifying their power across Detroit's underworld. They were feared and respected, but Boone knew deep down that this kind of dominance couldn't last forever. The streets have a way of catching up to even the most ruthless players, but for the time being, the money was rolling in and they were still calling the shots. One of their more high-profile jobs during this time was a hit contract on none other than Richard Wersch Jr., better known as White Boy Rick. White Boy Rick was notorious in his own right. He had become the youngest informant for the FBI at just 14 years old, helping to bring down several Detroit drug kingpins with the information he provided. But after his time working with the feds, Rick's life took a nosedive when he was busted in 1987 with 9,000 grams of coke and $30,000 in cash. He was sentenced to decades in prison and wouldn't see freedom until his release in 2020. In the world Boone operated in, a snitch was a dead man walking. The price on Rick's head was right, and Boone was more than ready to accept the job.
I was hired to Washi Jr., better known as White Boy Rick.
The first attempt to take White Boy Rick out didn't go as planned, but Boone and his crew weren't the kind to give up easily. They devised a new plan, something more strategic and cunning. The idea was to get themselves thrown in jail for a minor offense so they could gain access to Rick, who was under federal protection on the inside. Once they got close, the plan was to finish the job, and afterward, their connections would work to get the charges against them dropped. It was a bold move that showcased just how deep Boone's ties ran and how far his reach extended even behind bars. Fortunately for Rick, the feds caught wind of the plot and he was moved before Boone could execute his plan. As Boone continued to navigate the dangerous world of crime, death was always around the corner. But it wasn't until the emder of his younger brother Andre that everything truly began to unravel for Boone and the Best Friends. At the time, Boone was doing a short stint in prison. When Andre was offed, Boone was granted permission to attend his brother's funeral, and it was there that he learned some devastating news. Terrence Boogaloo Brown, the same man who had once been a close ally, was the one who had ordered the hit on Andre. Apparently, Andre had owed Boo some money and refused to pay, and instead of handling it peacefully, Boo decided to take his life.
And Bruiser tell me what happened. He said, Boo paid to have that done to Andre because Andre got some from him, and Andre wasn't giving him money. He told Boo to see me because I was part of our life.
This was the breaking point for Boone. Despite all the bloodshed and violence he had been involved in, family was still sacred to him. In Boone's eyes, if there was an issue with his brother, Boo should have come to him directly, and the debt would have been settled. But by offing Andre, Boo had crossed a line that could never be forgiven. Boone went back to prison to finish out the remainder of his sentence, but in his mind, revenge was already in motion. He and his affiliates started plotting to take Boo down. The plan was simple. They would set Boo up to be implicated in a crime, ensuring that he would get sent to prison. Once Boo was behind bars, Boone's connection on the inside would take care of the rest, butchering Boo in cold blood. The Best Friends, who had once been like brothers, were now Boone's mortal enemies. As far as Boone was concerned, Boo had betrayed him in the worst way possible, and there was no coming back from that. But this deadly game wasn't just one-sided. Boo was no fool, and he understood the high-stakes chess game they were playing. He knew Boone would want revenge, and he was constantly watching his back. What made the situation even more intense was the fact that both Boone and Boo were still trying to maintain the appearance of civility, pretending like nothing was wrong even though they were secretly plotting each other's downfall. Little did the Best Friends crew know, Boone had another trick up his sleeve. In a shocking twist, Boone got caught up with the feds and decided to flip the script by becoming an informant himself. By working with law law enforcement, Boone would be able to take down his former associates from the inside, locking them up and leaving them vulnerable behind prison's walls, where he could exact his revenge on Boo and the rest of the crew that had turned on him. Unfortunately for Boone, things would take a dark turn at a funeral for one of their associates named Mark. Boone saw this as the perfect opportunity to finally take out Boo, who he believed was behind his brother's death. But Boo wasn't an easy target. He had his crew around him, always keeping an eye on him, and Reg was locked up at the time, which added to the complications. There was also a witness that needed to be taken out to make sure the case against Reg would fall through. Boo came up with a plan and enlisted Boone for the hit, but there was a catch. All of the best friends crew were supposed to tag along. What Boone didn't realize was that this hit job was actually a setup. Boo and the others were using it as a cover to take Boone out once and for all. On the day of the hit, Boone and his crew paid a cab driver to wait nearby while they went to pick up their target. But things went sideways fast. As soon as the bullets started flying, the cab driver panicked and took off, driving right into the line of fire. In the chaos, Boone turned around to chase down the car, and that's when he felt a sharp pain in his back. He reached around and saw blood on his hand. Before he could fully process what was happening, another shot hit him in the hand, knocking out a piece of his bone. It became terrifyingly clear his own crew was trying to off him.
Yeah, how many times have you been shot?
Multiple times. AK, M16, 350 in the back, shotgun blast. I don't know if you can see that.
Wow.
As he looked up, another bullet grazed his neck, sending him staggering backward. Desperate, Boone pulled out his gun, trying to defend himself, but as he was drawing it, everyone scattered. Little did they know, one of the bullets had also damaged his other hand, leaving him unable to fire his weapon. He was wounded and vulnerable, but by some miracle, Boone survived the ambush, bearing the scars that told the story of how his closest allies had turned on him. In the aftermath of the failed hit, the feds tied Boone to the Emders, including that of the innocent cab driver who had been caught in the crossfire. Boone later admitted in interviews that he had already been working with the feds, feeding them information about the best friends operation, including the locations of guns they had stashed, hoping to get them locked up. He knew the crew was planning to take his life, but when he warned authorities, they dismissed his concerns as paranoia. Boone tried to explain that he had no choice but to take part in the hit job. If he didn't, the best friends would have offed him right then and there. But again, the authorities didn't listen. As part of his deal with the feds, Boone agreed to snitch on the 6 key members of the best friends gang, hoping to get them off the streets and into prison where he could carry out his revenge. But in a cruel twist of fate, they ended up turning on him too, cooperating with law enforcement to save their own skins. Despite it all, Boone managed to make it out alive, something few in his line of work could ever say. By the end of his criminal career, Boone had admitted to being involved in at least 30 Emders, and in exchange for his cooperation with the feds, he was granted immunity and placed into witness protection. For a time, Boone disappeared, but eventually he made his way back to Detroit. Despite the blood on his hands, there's one death that still haunts him: the death of the innocent cab driver. Boone was a cold-blooded K-er, but he had a code, and that code was never to involve anyone who wasn't part of the life. The death of the cabbie violated that principle, and it's the one Emder that still causes Boone to wake up in cold sweats and nightmares to this day. Boone's legacy in Detroit was written in blood. He left behind a trail of bodies, a reign of terror that shaped the city's criminal landscape, and the dark tales of betrayal that followed him wherever he went.